IVM.
I did what I was told, got good at coloring within the lines, having the right answer, pleasing teachers. I coasted relying on my memory, but I wasn't ready. I couldn't handle myself or my heart or read others' minds. Break some rules while you're in school. Learn to fail. Bounce back from mistakes. There is no reward for learning to color inside the line. Beautiful words from a woman who took the deep road inside to discover herself. She's someone who's got both her left and right brain at work. She loves telling stories. She's traveled far and wide to hear her soul call. Joining us in the studio is TV producer, writer, and investor Natasha Malpani Oswal. Hi, Natasha. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction. That's actually one of my favorite poems from Boundless.
Yes, that is from your book, The Boundless, and we're going to talk a lot about that as we explore this conversation. A little bit about Natasha before we have this deep conversation on your show, Beyond Cliché. This is your host and host, Al, and I'm here to have a conversation with the lovely Natasha Malpani Oswal, who runs Boundless Media, a creative house that makes bold stories for a changing India. Talking about changing India, well, let me tell you, I'm a change maker who is also running a campaign asking a leading diaper company to put both the mother and the father's picture on the diaper wrapper. Why is it that only mothers have to change diapers? Food for thought. If you like my campaign, please go to www.change.org/Papa-Pampers2. Well, coming back to the guest in the studio today, in this virtual studio, as we all deal with COVID-19, I have with me a fellow IVMer. Yes, I have someone who also is a podcast host. She runs a podcast called Boundless on IVM, and you can find it on many platforms. She holds a master's degree from Oxford and Cambridge and an MBA from Stanford. She was previously an investment director at a $1 billion impact investing fund in London and worked in cancer research as well. She started off to be an immunologist, and then her road widened. And how? We're here to explore that. So Natasha, in one of your interviews, you said that Indian women are taught to put others before themselves from an early age.
Mm-hmm.
What was your childhood like? You also said you were studying immunology, busy pleasing people. So let's just explore you, and let's start with your childhood. Tell us more about how you were raised. What was happening with you as a child?
So basically, I was the definition, I think, of a people pleaser when I was a child without really knowing it. So I was, very lucky to get very good grades when I was in school, and I did so well that I sort of started getting very addicted to praise from my parents and my teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, there's this sort of very false reward mechanism for students that do well, right? So you must notice that the people who come like first in school or get the best grades are not usually the ones who actually build companies or, and end up doing something disruptive. Because I think the more you do well in school, the more you're taught to, follow rules, listen to authority, think that there is a right answer or a way to do things. And so, of course, I didn't do all of that. So, my parents were doctors. And because I used to get good grades, even though I was actually, a very passionate reader and writer, I actually wrote, my first biography when I was 4 years old.
At 4, I know. And you also started your first business, which was a library, when you were just 9.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I obviously, I had this entrepreneurial gene. I obviously liked media and storytelling when I was young, but I was just so focused, on on achievement and listening to my elders that, when I was growing up, it was very much still the thinking that, if you did well in school, you would end up doing medicine or engineering. So, it didn't even occur to me that I could study English or arts or liberal arts.
Right.
It was very much that, of course, I was going to become a doctor because my parents were doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So I just very blindly followed that thinking, and then got into medical school because, of course, what I'd basically learned to do until I was 18 is to do well in exams.
Mm-hmm.
Got into a very good medical school. And then I realized in my first week of enrolling, that firstly, I hate hospitals. I feel sick in hospitals.
Yeah.
I really don't like injections, so it just made no sense for me to be a doctor. And honestly, it's like, of course I want to help people, but I don't necessarily want to help sick people,
Right.
So I was just like, what am I doing? Like, how did I get here?
Right.
So for the first ever, I did something against the grain, and I dropped out of school. But even then, I didn't really ask myself what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't word. I just thought, I better do the next best thing. And so then I very quickly enrolled into a degree in biotechnology. So I think I was so scared of, losing my way or not having a path. I didn't think, maybe I should just take a gap year, or, maybe I should just take some time to reflect, before I take the next.
So
and
clearly, you were not breaking any rules. Like you said, you just were scared of moving away from your path. Before we move into your story ahead, Natasha, you said you identified yourself as a people pleaser, right?
Yeah.
Now, what defines a people pleaser? Like, what is the characteristic of a people pleaser? And especially you're talking about women also having to please others and place others before themselves. So since we're talking about gender stereotyping, I want to sort of understand this a little bit more. What is people pleaser?
Yeah, I think at least for me, it was someone who was so addicted to praise and looking good in front of my parents and peers and teachers that, like I said, it's someone who doesn't really say, but who am I? What do I want? Someone that sort of defines themselves by other people's acceptance, which is, I think actually a very unhappy way to live life. Because then even when you get the reward, you get the praise, you're not really pleasing yourself. And I think, I'm sure we'll get here, but that is really the message of, the poetry I write and a lot of the stories I now tell at Boundless Media is that, unless you can please yourself, you cannot please anyone else. So I thought I was being a people pleaser, and I think, exactly like you said, women are raised to be people pleasers because we're defined by being daughters, then we're defined by being wives, then we're defined by mothers. We're always defined by other people in our lives, right? We're never defined just by who we are. And so I think that's exactly what I went on this 10-year-long journey of doing, which is saying, but who am I? What do I like? Independent of anything or anyone around me. And of course, it took me 10 years. I don't think it needs to take 10 years whatsoever. So hopefully, someone that is listening to this conversation can find a lot of shortcuts.
So then you dropped out of medical college and you decided to pursue a degree in technology. And still you weren't really breaking all the rules like you truly wanted to later on. So what happened then? What happened while you pursued the degree in technology?
Yeah, so it was a degree in biotechnology. And so obviously, unsurprisingly, I was again very unhappy in those 3 years. They should have been 3 great years because, of course, I was an undergrad, I was in college. That was supposed to be my coming of age phase. But because dropped out, even though I had great grades, and I was so silly, I didn't really just take the time to apply to better schools. I just immediately thought, oh my God, I don't have a plan. Let me instantly fill my time, which I also think is a very dangerous, a very dangerous habit of people that are used to pleasing others. It's very difficult to not have a plan or a path. I just enrolled into the first school or program that was open, which obviously was not a very good school or program. Basically hated the 3 years. And I honestly just didn't go to school. I basically just bunked all my classes. But that was actually my first turning point. because those 3 years were so terrible that I said, you know what, I'm never going to let this happen to me again. I'm going to start taking charge of my own life. And I'm not going to let other people tell me what I should do. I know that personally for me, I want to get out of India and I want to study abroad just so that I can have the space to really, think and explore who I am and what I like. So I applied for a master's at Oxford in immunology and I got in. And I got a fully funded scholarship, and of course also that financial independence really helped. And so then I went abroad, and that was a big turning point because, when I went abroad and I was already 21 at this time, that's the first time, obviously, I met people from all over the world, had very different backgrounds. And I realized, one, I wasn't at all used to spending any time alone. I had so many other people's voice in my head that I didn't know what I thought. Two, I was completely incapable of taking care of myself, because, I had quite a privileged upbringing. So, I just had no idea how to really take care of myself. And then 3, I also realized that, I definitely need to leave science. And then, finished my master's at Oxford and then enrolled into a degree in development at Cambridge. So completely changed my career path.
So let's just take a little pause here to sort of understand when a woman decides to choose her own path. That point in your life where you said, I'm done with biotechnology, this isn't working, I need to figure out something for myself and maybe just take charge of my life, like you said. How easy is it for a woman to stand up and do that? Because we see a lot of societal pressure, especially for a woman to really choose her own path. What was it like for you?
Yeah, I think, one, obviously I was lucky because I was still relatively young, right? I was 20. So I had less of, trying to please 2 families or a partner at that time. So I think it is much easier when you're younger, of course, because you can make that space to say, I'm going to put myself first. So not having any ties, beyond my own parents helped. And then secondly, it was interesting because, I didn't go abroad for my undergraduate degree because, because of course I was female, my parents preferred that I'd stay home.
Right.
Until I was 21, though, I'm guessing if I had been a man, maybe they would have been more accepting of me going abroad at 18. But I think, like I said, the turning point, I think, is getting financial independence. If you get a job offer or you get a scholarship, then I think it's very hard for anyone to tell you that, you can't do it. So I think it's less about, what other people want you to do. If you have the ability, right, to take that step forward. So I would say definitely, at any point in your life, try even if you can't have a full-time job, try and develop a side hustle that gives you some income that allows you to, some independent decisions. Because of course, if you're always having to ask for permission, it's very difficult for you.
Great. So we're in studio with Natasha Malpani Oswal, who's really telling a lot of women out there that if you want to take independent decisions, one small tip is try to get financially independent. We're going to be right back after a short break. This is Almas on Beyond Cliché.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you haven't been following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. Their support is much appreciated. Before I tell you about some of the shows that we have for you this week, I really wanted to really point out the incredible efforts of our host and our team. We've been able to maintain most of our production schedule in this lockdown, which is going into 4 months now. And I couldn't be happier with the fact that our hosts and team have been able to just get all of this stuff out so incredibly well. So I just really, really wanted to call them out for that and thank them for their support in this time. And since I spent so much time talking about that, I don't want to get you out of here quickly. Let me give you a quick update on a few shows that you should check out this week. On Siders, we had Amish Tripathi, really, really interesting discussion, both of them dive deep into history. Monty Panesar was on Edges and Sledges, another really cool show. On Advertising is Dead, Tanmay Bhatt showed up. That was a cool episode. Malini Agarwal, also probably better known as Miss Malini, showed up on Absolutely Right. It's just been an absolutely gangbusters week in terms of the kind of guests we've had and the conversations we've had on the network. Please do check some stuff out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Hello and welcome back to Beyond Cliché. This is your host and host Al, and I'm in conversation with the lovely Natasha Malpani Oswal, who's had this entire hero's journey, if I might want to call it. And in fact, Natasha, I'm going to talk to you about that, those 10 years of your life and how you sort of came to realize who you really were and what you wanted to do. In fact, in your book, The Boundless, you've got several sections, right? From falling, recovery, escape, belonging, discovery. And this really, to me, sounds more like a hero's journey. So tell us about the 10 lovely years of your life, which really were a breakthrough for you.
I am very grateful and feel very lucky to have been able to have so much time and space to really explore, what I loved and who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, once I'd done my master's in immunology, like I said, I did a master's at Cambridge. It was very freeing for me because I suddenly went from studying science to studying liberal arts. And that I think, what you study also does help shape your mindset. And then when you study something like liberal arts, you realize, how few rules there are and like how much of what you're learning is basically up. So that was a really good shift. And then I moved from Cambridge to London. Really luckily, I managed to find a job on Twitter that ended up being at a firm that ended up being $1 billion impact investing firm. So, I obviously had a background in immunology and development. I had no background in finance. I interviewed with one of the founders at this firm at the time, which hadn't launched. So they were still in stealth mode. And this woman actually, she was the chief operating officer. I think she just saw something in me and she decided to take a chance on me.
Wow.
So she basically just gave me this role that I was completely unqualified for, over people that had 10, 15 years more experience because this was my first job, so I actually now do also personally try to pay it forward, in terms of hiring people who are younger or more fresh. Because, I think when you hire people who have less experience and you just take a chance on them, they are much more, willing to go above and beyond to prove themselves, which is basically what happened with me. So I ended up 5 years at this fund that, grew from a startup to a really well-known company in the UK. And then from, being an analyst to an associate to a director. And, once I'd spent 5 years in the world of impact investing, I also happened to meet my husband during this time. So we'd been friends when I was in Bombay, but I'd been in the UK. I just happened to go down to Bombay for a holiday. I met him again, and we ended up doing long distance.
Mm-hmm.
He decided to change his business school decision. He was going to go to MIT for business school. He ended up coming to London because I was there. Mm-hmm. So that big turning point, in our relationship. Then we decided to get married, and he had so much fun in business school that I also decided to apply for business school and ended up going to Stanford. Mm-hmm. And seriously, it was at Stanford that I realized, that I wanted to actually be in storytelling and media and entertainment. And that was the obvious fit for me because, most people who want to be creative don't need to do an MBA to realize creative. The whole point is, in fact, you do an MBA because you want to be in investing or consulting. But I actually moved from being an investor to being a creative because they basically asked these two very pivotal questions during the program. Mm-hmm. That you really understand that it was just so obvious what I should be doing. These questions are helpful to anyone else. They were one, what do you do in your free time? And two, what did you do as a child? And that's basically when I started realizing what I said at the start of the conversation that obviously
it was a no-brainer for you. It was okay. It has to be words and books and storytelling.
Exactly. It was like, what am I doing? What is this whole science and impact investing? Clearly, I should be a storyteller. And so that's how I actually moved into media and entertainment.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the 5 years in the whole investing business, because there's a huge cliche around women and finance. And you're somebody that had no experience in finance. What were some cliches you had to face and break during that 5-year tenure?
Yeah, it is It's interesting how many cliches there are in women in finance. And I think, I sort of, at the start, even I contributed to that in some way, even though I'd already broken in. Because I didn't have a background in finance, I kept in a very silly way, reminding my colleagues that, I don't have a background in finance. I'm still learning, and I saw a lot of peers who were men who came in, who also had no background. They were just so good at faking it, right? Like if they didn't know something, they never admitted that they didn't know something.
Right.
They never said, they're learning. They never actually admitted any insecurity. So it obviously made people trust them a lot more and give them more senior work. And so that was actually a big lesson for me in terms of learning that, you don't have to be completely honest and wear your heart on your sleeve all the time, especially in the world of work. Sometimes you also don't have to pretend that you know everything. That's also very damaging, but the middle ground in terms of just saying, hey, it's completely fine to not know something. You just have to back yourself and be it's fine, I'll learn it.
Sometimes, Natasha, I think we also underplay our strengths as women.
Yeah.
So there's a thin line between obviously admitting wholeheartedly that you don't know something, underplaying something, and also faking it. And I think women are somewhere between underplaying it and admitting I don't know this at all.
Yeah, and I think this whole mindset, honestly, I think one of the reasons you have less women in finance is I think it's not just that it's hard to break into. I think less women are honestly attracted to being in finance because it's not that meaningful a career in a lot of ways. It's you're not necessarily always on the front lines building something, making change. You're basically helping usually you're in finance because you want to make money. So I think if you don't really necessarily have this pure ambition of just making a lot of money, it's actually very tough to stay incentivized. So I think that it's not just that it's tough to break in, it's also tough to stay if your only goal is not to make money.
So how did you survive for 5 years? What kept you going?
I was in impact investing. So I think it was different because I was investing in education. I was investing in health. I was investing in justice. So it was very different. I wasn't, just saying, let's lend to these 20 very standard businesses that make toothpaste or buy this property and then flip it or whatever. Not saying that, this is exactly what people in finance do. But there was a more clear impact angle to what I was doing. Actually, impact investing, if you see, is much more gender balanced than venture capital or private equity that has, a more financial goal. So that's exactly my point, that I think if you, have a more balanced approach to investing where you're saying that your goal isn't just to make money, but it's also to create change, it automatically draws more women.
Yeah.
So actually my company was, had a 50-50 gender ratio.
That's beautiful. And that kind of brings back to some of the research that I've been doing, Natasha, that primarily for women, we're so conditioned to nurture since childhood that if you have a job or a role that is creating an impact, nurturing lives, bringing about change, we're likely to put more into it as compared to a man who is really conditioned to provide more. The masculine energy there is very high, and therefore this whole angle of finance is much easier for them because at the end of the day, it is about bringing in that cash flow. It's about providing. So I totally get that. And those 5 years, I'm sure, also taught you a lot in your journey. So now you are here at Stanford, and those 2 questions have changed your life, and you realize, it is storytelling for me. What happens after that?
So by this time, I was a lot bolder, I think, because I'd sort of realized that there really aren't that many rules and you can do whatever you do, whatever you want to do, if you just have the courage and if you ask. So, I literally just, mapped. I basically said, okay, I want to be in media. What do I need to do? So I did 2 media internships, one in SF, one in Athens. I organized a media conference. I did 2 media studies. I took a bunch of media classes. I basically I hadn't been in India for 10 years. So I was like, okay, let's find out what's happening in India. So I mapped the Indian ecosystem, found 2 companies that I thought were really interesting, who were making content. And then I just reached out to the founders of both companies and said, hey, can I interview her? And then, I was lucky. I got a job offer from both. So then I basically chose one. and moved back to India. And that company ended up being Pocket Aces, which runs Filter Copy and Dice Media. So I ended up coming back to India as head of Dice Media, which again was, a huge shift because I had no background, in making shows or films. But I basically came back as like the head of a content division that was for a very fast growing company. Mm-hmm. So basically the ground running. So not only had to adjust to, moving back to India, but also then, had to sort of learn what does it mean to actually, build a creative team? How do you evaluate scripts? How do you set up a shoot? How do you cast? How do you edit? How do you basically make a show end to end? How do you place it on platforms? And I had an amazing experience at DICE because basically when I came in, I got to build an entire team from scratch. I worked on 4 shows end to end. I worked on an original, got to talk to all the OTT platforms. This was basically just when the OTT space was growing and Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar had sort of, come to India, was setting up, web series were taking off. So I think my timing was just amazing. So got to be right in the heart of it. So learned a lot, realized, okay, this is like obviously what I should be doing because I like marrying, both the creative and business side of things.
Yeah.
I decided to start my own creative company called Boundless Media. So basically the last 2 years in India, so I've been in India 2 years now. They've been, a huge period of growth for me because I basically I wrote a poetry book called Boundless. And actually the reason I wrote that book was I was initially very hesitant about coming back to India, even though I had this job offer. Because, I was like, what is it going to be like, not just being a wife, but also, really being a daughter-in-law for the first time in the sense that I'd obviously already been married for 4 years, but I'd never really lived with my in-laws. What is it going to be like balancing more roles? What is it going to be like, being a working woman in India? And honestly, I probably had a very outdated view of what it was like to work and live in India because I've been out for so long.
Right.
I started writing these poems literally as like notes to myself on my phone app.
Right.
So I had no intention of actually writing a book or anything. I was literally just writing my feelings to myself on my phone. And then, I guess in a very millennial way, I decided to put them on Instagram. Literally just snapshots of my poetry on Instagram. And they did really well, because I think that message really resonated. Because I was actually saying how I was saying to myself that, hey, it's taken so long for me to find my own voice. I don't want to lose it. So I think there was honesty, actually a lot of honesty in those poems because they were sort of like my diary. So I think they did well. And so then decided to publish a book. So it was cool because I basically got into learned a lot about poetry and publishing and also running a creative house. And now I'm trying to do all those things at Boundless.
Beautiful, beautiful. So while you were capturing these notes to yourself, you were mostly capturing your fears and feelings. Natasha, what was your biggest fear as a woman?
My biggest fear was that it had just taken me so long to find my voice. I don't want to lose it again,
Right.
So it was this thing that I'd finally got used to being very independent, having a lot of space, doing what I wanted. So I was very worried that, I'd come back and then again have all these voices, telling me what to do, what not to do, how to be, I'd have to fit into some stereotypical roles. And that was basically my concern that how can I preserve this identity that I've not just found, but I actually created.
So you came back and you got into a profession again, which is not something that is very women dominated. You have women in this space, but like you said, you're heading the whole show from scratch. You're setting up a team, doing things. How was your experience as a woman in those 2 years of your life where you were trying to get your voice out in media?
Yeah. So I think that on the poetry side, it was actually really heartening because I honestly didn't expect the response we got to Boundless. I have so many women reaching out to me, messaging me, on different platforms saying that the poetry really resonated with them. It made them cry. It helped them stand up to their families or their husbands or, rethink what they're doing in their careers. So that's been really amazing. On the production front, I think you're right. It's not very common to have female producers. But I think it's such a big gap because that's why we don't have that many women-centric stories. It's the way we portray women in media really matters, right? Because that ends up being role models for the next generation.
Absolutely.
So I think it's so important to have women decision makers in media, because then, the what stories you choose to tell, what genres you pick, who you choose to cast, how developed your female characters are, all of that makes a big difference, right? So if I'm only going to choose to cast like very beautiful women that are a certain size and skin color, or I'm only going to choose to portray women as like, sort of like accessories to men and not give them enough lines or enough personality, then of course I'm basically creating stereotypes that like an entire generation is going to watch. So that's a very important thing that we do at Boundless, say that we're telling genre bending stories for a new India, but our stories, our characters, both men and women, are very well developed. They're very holistic. They're both genders are decision makers. We don't differentiate, that much in terms of what men and women can do or what roles they can have. Even in our casting, like we want to make bold choices in terms of, who we're portraying in different roles, and also want to show, not just young women on screen, but also older women on screen. There are the stories of women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, where stories of, what it means to grow up. Because I think a big thing for us is, of course, we tell stories that are coming of age, because we say we're telling stories for a new India. But, we think coming of age doesn't just happen once. I think basically we're coming of age multiple times, right? You don't just grow up when you're in college or, when you have your first job. Like you're learning with every transition or change you make in your life.
Right.
So that thing that like we also want to portray, because we think that's also a big gap. You see a lot of stories of young people.
Right.
Or that.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I mean, when was the last time I saw a story about somebody older? It's quite a cliche.
Yeah, and so of course now you have movies like Thappad and Panga, which are like very clearly made by, women writers and directors, who are bringing stories to screen. But yeah, there's definitely more we can do there.
Interesting. So you're clearly moving beyond cliche in the media work that you're doing. So let's just talk a little bit about Boundless, because that's a book that's a clear tribute to women, is what you've said. And it's also about coming of age, finding your voice, all of that. There's an entire section dedicated to ego and sacrifice, and we sort of related that to women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, maybe if you read the poems, there's like a little bit of a rebellious tone. Some of the poems do talk about, the fact that, women are defined by sacrifice, or that, sometimes other women are also, part of the problem, where, if you raise your son to marry someone who is, just going to, based on how they look, or someone that just, because they don't want to have a career, then, you're also like part of the problem. So I think, the poems aren't just saying to women, hey, find your own voice. They're also saying that, be aware of how you are not just of the decisions you're making in your own life, but then also what sort of example you're setting, with your own husband, your son, your father-in-law, because it's hard to say, hey, I want my space, or I want to be independent, or, women should have equal rights, if we then don't also get the men in our lives to buy into those messages or support us, right? And I think I have been exceptionally lucky, actually, with my father, my husband, and my father-in-law, where my father very much raised my sister and me to maybe not necessarily like, just do whatever we want, because like I said, I was a people pleaser, but very much to say, hey, you are smart. Like it's not just about like how you look, and about being wife. It is very much about like, you need to use your brains to do something. My husband, like I said, compromised on his business school decision to come to London. And then again, when he had a career in London, he left it to come to California for me. He made a lot of compromises in terms of where we live and what we do to also support my career. And then again, my father-in-law is actually a very big supporter of Boundless Media. He was one of the people who launched it. So I hope that men also read, the poems in Boundless, and it's not just for women, because if you don't have men support and propagate the message, I think it's very difficult. It's not really a battle, right? Like it's not, I mean, I guess it is, of course it is a battle in some ways, but if it's only a battle and you make it very antagonistic, then you're not really going to get people on your side, right? So I see it much more as like building community.
Absolutely. Very well said, Natasha, because the issue today is that whenever you talk about, let's say, feminism, it is perceived as a notion of women wanting to bash men, and that's really not the idea, right? I think men are also equally suffering with this whole imbalance in the society. There's just way too much pressure on men, and we need to have more men participating in this journey. And it is never really the man. The issue is patriarchy and the way the whole conditioning is done with us. And that needs to change, and we need both men and women participating in this. It's not a battle. We need to build a community together. Absolutely.
And what I really like actually is, what a lot of Gen Z, so I'm millennial, but I think, what a lot of Gen Z believes is that gender is fluid.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, and I think this is actually like, something my husband and I, now talk about a lot in terms of roles, so it's not, we don't at all see that it's like my husband's role to provide for the house or like my role to take care of the house. Like we're both actually very fluid in our definitions and roles. So like, we both equally spend as much time at work and at home. My husband like equally spends as much time, supporting everything that happens in the house. And we also don't see it as like, when it comes to like household chores, like cooking and cleaning and stuff, we don't see it as chores. We see it as building a home together, which I think is actually really good for a relationship. Because, if you see it as like, one person has to do all the work, then a lot of resentment builds up. And obviously like in the pandemic, this has like become a much more big topic.
Yeah. A lot of women are taking the entire brunt of cleaning up and cooking all the time. And this is a very important thing that you spoke about. I think your husband and you are setting some major couple goals and setting some good examples, because cleaning the home is cleaning a home. It's got nothing to do with gender roles.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
Exactly. And I think, if you see it as less like, it's not a chore, like, hey, we're building something together, then I think my husband's actually very good at this, like he makes cooking fun, so then we both want to be in the kitchen. I think like it is nice if we can also make this like, it's not just about building a community, but if you sort of think about it as like actually strengthening your relationship, that's also like a very positive way to say, how can we be on a more equal footing?
Brilliant. And I think a lot of this has to go back to the way, like you said, your father-in-law is very supportive of Boundless and is giving you support. I think a lot of it goes back to the way we raise children. And that is where we can really move beyond cliché. So Natasha, it was lovely having this conversation with you. We've spoken about you literally finding your voice and traveling through this journey to discover who you are and breaking some norms and truly discovering yourself. Natasha, what would you like to say to someone, a woman out there, who's really struggling to figure out who she is? She's probably sitting there in the midst of this pandemic, reflecting through the pages of her life, wondering, where am I? Who am I? What is it that I want to do? What's my calling? What is my voice? Where is my voice? What would you like to tell them?
I'd like to say, it's a journey. It's not like you find your voice and then,
so it's not like it's a eureka moment. Wow, it's done. And that's about it. There's a lot more to that.
We're always evolving. We're always changing. Like we need to keep looking inside and, not just finding our voice. We actually need to create it. So I'd say two things. Like one, you're creating your voice. You're developing it. It's a journey and it takes work and it takes time. And the second is that, please try and spend time alone. I know it's really difficult, especially now when you have, your family to take care of and maybe aging parents or in-laws and you're trying to balance work and taking care of a home. But, whatever time you can, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes in a day, whether it's through yoga, meditation, taking a walk, journaling, just make sure you spend time alone, because if you don't make that space for yourself, you're going to drown out your voice. So put all your devices off, don't like hide behind a book or a TV show or, whatever it is, and just like even if people need you, I mean, like I said at the start, you can't really please people unless you please yourself, and I sort of like see it as a cup, like you're like sort of this vessel, and like, how are you going to fill up other people's cups if you're running low?
Absolutely. So, you can't pour from an empty cup for sure.
Exactly. So you have to take care of yourself, I think. So just take care of yourself, spend some time alone. And, when you're looking for your voice, like know that, you're making your voice.
Lovely. What great words to probably end this beautiful conversation with Natasha Malpani Oswal. We've been in conversation for a while now, and we've spoken about a so-called people pleaser little girl to an evolved woman, if I might use that word right now, somebody who's not only found her voice, but is also trying to make voice, create voice, bring about change through Boundless Media and the work that she's doing. This is Almas on Beyond Cliché, and we're going to be back again with another interesting story, another conversation of people that have really moved beyond cliché. Thank you, Natasha, so much for joining us today. If people want to reach out to you, how do they find you on social media? What's your handle?
You can find me on Instagram at Natasha Malpani Oswal and at Twitter on Natasha_Malpani. And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I thought your questions were so insightful. And also really love the work you're doing. I really like the message that you started out with, right? It's the same thing that we've been talking about. Absolutely. Like the images that we portray really affect, how society develops and behaves. So yes, definitely diaper companies, make sure you put men, on the pictures as well as women.
Please do support my campaign. It's www.change.org/PapaPampers2. I run a campaign called #TurnOffTheStereo. Let's move beyond stereotypes. Let's move beyond cliché. And also don't forget to tune in to Natasha's podcast, Boundless. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, very quickly. Basically, because the poetry book did really well, we thought, why just stick to text? We should just convert the poetry into audio. So what we've done is we've just taken different themes from the book and created episodes around the stories and secrets behind the poems in Boundless. So do tune in.
Do tune in to that podcast and hear Natasha's beautiful voice. I personally love her podcast. Do tune in, please. This is Almas signing off. For more episodes of Beyond Cliché, please do download the app, IVM Podcast app, or you can also tune into www.ivmpodcast.com. You can find me on social media. I'm pretty much everywhere. You can find me on Instagram, almasvirani_1111. You can also find me on Twitter, almasvirani11. And do figure out the hashtag Turn Off the Stereo. We're trying to create awareness on gender stereotyping. This is Almas Virani on Beyond Cliché signing off. Thank you. Stay safe. Stay happy.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep, or lose weight, or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.